Hello again, and good evening from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. I continue my brief video series on the US presidents who are known to have been Freemasons. One of them was Harry Truman, Franklin Roosevelt's successor, who was famous for having a quick temper and for speaking bluntly, especially in his campaign speeches. And also, like several other US presidents, he often spoke roughly, although his language at least wasn't as nasty as the language of the current US President, Donald Trump. He was a Baptist since 1902 or 1903, but his Baptist faith seems to have been more a matter of convenience and somehow a sense of personal duty than a matter of personal conviction. According to, I think, an online source, which unfortunately I haven't been able to locate, he occasionally made critical or disparaging remarks about revival preachers, so he didn't seem to like revival preaching too much. And he certainly disliked the fact that in July 1950, just weeks after the North Korean army had attacked South Korea, starting the Korean War, the 31-year-old Baptist evangelist Billy Graham had unwisely quoted Trump when asked about what they had been discussing in the White House. Graham was there with, I think, three or four other evangelists. And so angry was President Truman at Graham for having abused the privilege of meeting the president that he never asked Graham to return to the White House again during the last 2.5 years of his presidency. In 1967, he was kind enough to invite Graham to Independence, Missouri, his retirement home, where Graham did apologize deeply for having unwisely quoted the president. Truman graciously forgave him. "Oh, don't worry about it. I realized you had not been properly briefed," in other words, advised. However, between 1950 and 1967, Truman did make two notably critical, even mocking remarks about Billy Graham, showing his contempt towards this evangelist's ministry. He claimed that Graham was a counterfeit, in other words, that Graham wasn't a real evangelist but only pretended to be one, and that he was a publicity seeker. Maybe he disliked the massive evangelistic meetings called crusades that Graham was already conducting and would indeed conduct still for over 50 years, although as he aged, no longer so frequently, and which his older and much more famous son, Franklin Graham, is continuing as festivals. But in any case, Truman was also a Freemason, and he seems to have been a notably committed Freemason. Let's read on. According to the Business Insider article, which is my main source for these videos, the 33rd US president helped establish a Masonic lodge in Belton, Missouri in 1911 and was elected its first master or leader, according to the Truman Library. The Truman Library also cites some of Truman's letters to his future wife, Bess Wallace, during which he confessed to having the big head terribly and warned her that he would forever be bragging about having performed that ceremony. He continued to rise within the Freemasons throughout the 1920s. According to one observer, Truman did a good job in the lodge work. Excellent. He was an excellent director. If things weren't going right along smoothly, he would come in and get them to going. He was a good lodge man. He eventually became a Grandmaster Mason, but ended his role in a blaze of glory in the next year while still a US Senator. A few years later, during his presidency, he remained a committed Mason. The New York Times reported that Truman's only jewelry was a double-band gold Masonic ring on the little finger of his left hand. The Truman Library also reports that in 1945, he became the only US president to have received the 33rd or highest degree of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. In Harry S. Truman, His Life and Times, Brian Burns quotes Truman as writing, "Freemasonry is a system of morals which makes it easier to live with your fellow man, whether he understands it or not." And indeed, he blamed many of the world's problems, including wars, on what he thought was useless fighting between members of different religions about which religion is right or the most correct. He favored ecumenism not only among the many different Christian churches and denominations, but also between the Christian churches and the non-Christian religious communities. No wonder he didn't consider Christian evangelism to be any great endeavor to be undertaken. Let's see. According to the nmasonic.com website, the Encyclopedia Masonic, Truman was a high-ranking Freemason, much like some of his US president predecessors. Again, like many Masons, he joined the order before stepping into high political power, not after. In 1909, Truman was initiated into a Masonic lodge called Belton Lodge number 450 in Missouri. While this encyclopedia claims that it's a misconception that individuals only join Freemasonry when they are part of the elite, in other words, the privileged high social groups. Truman was only a junior officer in the National Guard at this point. Freemasonry, according to this source, well, naturally, because it's written by Freemason, takes people in and makes them better. Well, that's what they claim. But many people who have, by God's grace, probably most, a great majority of the people have, by God's grace, become born-again Christians while still Freemasons have radically different views. When Truman became president of the United States in 1945, he considered his past role as Grand Master as one of the greatest honors of his life. He was made a 33rd degree Freemason about 5 months into his presidency on October the 9th, 1945. Then Truman was a religious person, but he wasn't a consistent religious person. As I noted, he spoke roughly, and then he wasn't a regular churchgoer, especially later in life. He showed a kind of civic religion in, for example, the above quotes. "I'm convinced that we are strong enough to meet the challenge. We are strong enough because we have a profound religious faith. The basic source of our strength as a nation is spiritual. We believe in the dignity of man. We believe that he is created in the image of God, who is the Father of us all. It is this faith that makes us respect the right of men everywhere to worship as they please and to live their own lives free from the fear of tyranny and strife. I believe that every problem in the world today could be solved if men would only live by the principles of the ancient prophets and the Sermon on the Mount." Well, indeed, during his only presidential encounter with evangelist Billy Graham in July 1950, when Graham asked the president about his religious background and leanings, Truman replied succinctly or briefly, "Well, I try to live by the Sermon on the Mount and the Golden Rule." Then Graham noted, "It takes more than that, Mr. President. It's faith in Christ and his death on the cross that you need. After that statement was pronounced by Graham, Truman stood up. And then Graham asked politely if they could pray. Uh, Truman replied something like this: "It can't do any harm," or "I suppose it can't do any harm." In other words, he was by no means enthusiastic to have the evangelist pray for him. That is why each of us has a duty to participate actively in the religious life of his community and to support generously his own religious institutions. So, once again, a blend of religiosity and civic religion. Just as an active faith sustained and guided the pioneers in conquering the wilderness, so today an active faith will sustain and guide us as we work for just peace, freedom for all, and a world where human life is truly held sacred. Religious faith and religious work must be our reliance as we strive to fulfill our destiny in the world. So these excerpts were from his radio speech as part of the program Religion in American Life, broadcast on October the 30th, 1949. He gave a speech at a luncheon of the National Conference of Christians and Jews on November the 11th, 1949. It is only the people of religious faith throughout the world who have the power to overcome the force of tyranny. It is in their beliefs that the path can be found to justice and freedom. Their religious concepts are the only sure foundation of the democratic ideal. And then two last quotes from a speech he gave to the Washington Pilgrimage of American Churchmen on September the 28th, 1951. Another fact which you will notice in the course of our pilgrimage is that the makers of our Constitution believed in religious toleration. Theirs was the highest type of religion, forbidding the use of coercion or force in matters of mind and spirit. Religious freedom was a part of their religious faith, and they received that from Roger Williams, a Baptist, from William Penn, a Quaker, and from Lord Baltimore, a Catholic. That's the reason for our constitutional approach to religious freedom. And finally, from his book, Mr. Citizen, written or published in 1960. We have gone a long way towards civilization and religious tolerance, and we have a good example in this country. Here, the many Protestant denominations, the Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church, do not seek to destroy each other in physical violence just because they do not interpret every verse of the Bible in exactly the same way. Here we now have the freedom of all religions, and I hope that never again will we have a repetition of religious bigotry as we have had in certain periods of our own history. There is no room for that kind of foolishness here.